so they had different constraints, time constraints. We had some devotees that came on. So the groups have naturally become unbalanced. The new devotees need to be assigned to some group, and some of the older groups may have got depleted. So this would be a way for the groups to get rebalanced. So hopefully by the next discussion, we have all the new devotees are now part of the group, and the ones that have dropped out have been removed from the group. Okay, so
Prabhu, Prabhu, just sorry to interrupt, Prabhu. I have sent a link, like a survey, in the group chat. So if devotees can, take that survey, then we will know who is there and who is not there, and then we can form the groups, Prabhu. So just letting everybody know about that.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhu. Yeah, so please do click on that link and complete the survey. Okay, so I'm now going to request the first group to present their section of the chapter.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. So we have been assigned the first section. So we're talking about chapter 6, Dhyan Yoga. So in the chapter, Krishna spoke briefly in the verses 27th and 28 about how Nishkam Karma Yoga and Ashtanga Yoga leads to liberation. So now he's going to describe Ashtanga Yoga in greater detail in this chapter. First verses, in the first two verses, Krishna again praises Nishkam Karma Yoga. Again, Nishkam Karma Yoga is needed for a devotee or for a yogi to go on to Ashtanga Yoga. Ashtanga Yoga is a little difficult to practice in this age of Kali. So throughout this chapter, it'll be mentioned that it's really difficult. Going to verses 1 and 2, Krishna says that a yogi or a true sannyasi is one who is detached from the future results. So Nishkam Karma Yoga is praised. And yogi and a sannyasi are basically the same, because a sannyasi is renouncing the fruits of the actions, and a yogi does not. Well, if yogi will not renounce, then he will get agitated by the material things. So basically, yogi and the sannyasi are on the same level because of the detachment from the fruits of their actions. And in verses 3 and 4, Krishna explains how the first stage of Ashtanga Yoga is called Yoga Aruruksha, which is the beginning stage, and the advanced stage is called Yoga Arudha. So there are 8. Ashtanga means 8 limbs. So Ashta means 8, Anga means limbs. So 8 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga are Yama, which are the don'ts or the prohibition. Yama, Niyama, which is the do's, and then asanas, which are the body exercises, pranayama, the breathing, control of breathing, and pratyahara, withdrawing your senses, then dharana, which is basically fixing your mind on the Supreme Lord or the Paramatma, then dhyana, which is intense meditation, and finally samadhi. So yoga arudha stage is basically the steady meditation, which is at the dhyana, which starts from the dhyana stage. So then in the yoga aruruksha stage, you're still doing Nishkam Karma Yoga, because you need to purify your senses and your mind. And along with Ashtanga Yoga, so with the exercises and the niyamas and the yamas, slowly when you get to yoga arudha stage, basically you're giving up all your material activities. You're completely free from material material activities, and then you can do completely Ashtanga Yoga. So you're not doing any activity. So that's the verses 3 and 4. And in 5 and 6, Krishna talks about that the mind can be an enemy and or a friend. A controlled mind is a friend, whereas an uncontrolled mind is an enemy. And in verses 7 through 9, he's talking about the symptoms of a yogi who is in a yoga arudha stage. So he's saying that a person who is in that advanced stage, he doesn't have, he's equipoised. He doesn't have any mental, physical, or at the egoistic level, he does not have those dualities. So he thinks happiness and distress, heat and cold, honor, distress at the same level. And he is self-realized, and he sees everything, whether it's a pebbles, stone, or gold, as the same. And at the very, very advanced stage, he sees everyone as equal, whether the person is a friend, an enemy, a well-wisher, a pious or sinner. He sees them with the same vision. So that's all, Prabhu. You're muted, Prabhu.
Okay. So 2 years working from home, I still haven't been able to figure out to unmute myself. Sorry about that. Thank you, Prabhu. Excellent summary. We'll hold the questions for later on, and we can move on to the next group. And as usual, take between 3 to 5 minutes to present the topic. Thank you.
So we broke this topic between a few people, so I'll be the first one and someone will continue. In verses 10 to 32 describe this sadhana, which can be practiced by a yogi who is already on the level of yoga rudha. That's the stage when the yogi's mind became his friend, and the mind does as the yogi commands him. So at first, Krishna gives a brief description of this yoga practice, and then he gives more details. The brief description of what a yogi should do is the following. Basically, he should give up all material attachments, focus on Paramatma, meditate on it all the time, and after death, go to the spiritual world. And then Krishna gives the following recommendations for the yogi. A yogi has to remain celibate. He has to live alone in a remote place. He should not have any belongings except for the deer skin. He should not sit too high, not to fall down, and not too low, so that that place doesn't get flooded. And he should eat and sleep in moderation. Prabhupada commands that Paramatma is present in our heart as a four-handed Vishnu form. And this yoga practice is solely for us or for a yogi to discover and see this localized form, and not for any other purpose. So to get rid of the material suffering, one should practice yoga. To do this, one should be moderate in foods, in eating, sleeping, and he should obey all other regulations so that his mind is calm. And with such a balance, when the mind is controlled, then this yoga practice will lead the yogi to the deliverance from suffering. And in the verse 6, Krishna formulates the goal of dhyana yoga, which is attainment of real peace and reaching Krishna's supreme abode by means of cessation of material existence. Okay, Kapila is gonna follow me.
Okay, so I'm actually going to want to recommend something to your group, Gayatri Mataji. So the idea is that one person could speak for the group, because you yourself have taken 5 minutes to speak. So it basically then.
Look at this guy.
All right, we will take it for the next time.
So that will also help the group coordinate with one another better. So, one person speaks, everybody contributes to it. The same person doesn't have to speak all the time. Different people can speak. But if different people speak, there's no way that we can keep the time. Like I said, you already taken 5 minutes, and the other people will take, so it'll eat into other people's time. So please keep that in mind for future. And the next person can go ahead and speak.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Haribol Mataji, I can hear you.
So the section is 18 to 32. The yogi reaches perfection when his consciousness rises to the level of Atmanishvesate. To reach it, the yogi regulates the activity of his mind, get rid of the material desires, and attain the spiritual existence. So one of the criteria of yogi is the absence of material desires. Devotees can also reach this stage by engaging their senses in service. So perfection in Ashtanga yoga involves discipline, mental activities, being fixed in self devoid of material desires, just like a lamp in windless wave doesn't waver. So having attained this stage, one thinks there is no greater gain. Situated in full determination, one is never disturbed in any circumstances. This state of samadhi is real freedom from threefold miseries. There are two types of samadhis. Samprajnata samadhi, one becomes situated in transcendental position by various philosophical researchers, and asampranata samadhi, one becomes transcendental to all sort of happiness derived from senses. So one should have strong faith and determination without any deviation in the practice of yoga. One should control the senses completely using the mind. Yeah, Prabhu.
Thank you.
Over to Ranjita. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you. Okay, moving on.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. So I had the next section, which was 25 to 27. And for the sake of time, I'll try to cut mine even shorter. Basically, the verses 25 to 27 emphasize how the process is a step-by-step or gradual process by which one develops faith in the Lord. And then Krishna describes the characteristics of the mind being flickering, agitated, and unsteady. And he emphasizes how by practice of bhakti yoga and by stopping unfavorable activities, one can bring the mind under control. And lastly, he also alludes to the fact of how the position of the devotees is higher than that even of the yogi, because the yogi to an extent thinks of his own like liberation or happiness, but the devotees, they go even beyond that stage because they're even willing to give up their own personal happiness because the only thing that's on their mind is Krishna's happiness. That concludes my section.
Thank you, Prabhu. Okay.
Hari Bol Prabhuji. So my section is from 28 till 32. So a self-realized yogi gains one's position by continuous and unalloyed transcendental service to the Lord. This transcendental contact with Supreme is called Brahma Samparsha. Such a true yogi is free from material contamination and sees every living being equal, and sees Krishna as Paramatma in them. At this stage, Lord Krishna never disappears from the sight of such yogi, and he turns into a pure devotee of Krishna. A devotee is always concerned for welfare of all living beings and is therefore a true friend of everyone. He is the best of all yogis, and he strives for the perfection, not for his own benefit, but for the benefit of others, and he never quarrels with other creatures whom he perceives as parcels of Krishna. Arjuna was told the method by which a yogi goes into asamprajnata samadhi. Krishna spoke about the signs of such a person. He is a friend of all living beings, sees Supreme in the heart of everyone, and everyone as a parcel of the Supreme. The next section is Arjuna's reaction to the description of Ashtanga Yoga. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Next group.
Ranga?
Yeah. Hare Krishna, Prabhu. So again,
go ahead,
Prabhuji. You want to go ahead? That's fine.
No, there was no one, so I was trying to ask my wife to go ahead. But
sure, she can go ahead, Prabhuji. That's fine. I can add if you want.
Go
sure.
ahead,
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. For group 3's, the verse numbers were 33 to 36. So for group 3's verses on the necessity of controlling the turbulent mind, we would summarize this section as: the first point is Arjuna is rejecting the yoga system which Krishna described, claiming this method of yoga as impractical, which means it's impossible to understand and endure. And the second point is observing the strict rules and regulations of yoga are difficult. Following the path of devotion service is simpler. So, for example, by practice of the 9 types of devotion service to the Lord, one will cultivate attachment to spiritual satisfaction. The hearing, chanting, remembering, serving the Lord's lotus feet, the Navavida Bhakti, right? Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Pada Sevanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmanivedanam. So through these 9 processes, we can very easily adapt to the devotional service, which is much, much simpler compared to the very strict and stringent rules and regulations that has to be followed through the yoga system. And the third point is, for practical men in this age, the effort of controlling the mind is related to that of a man trying to capture the blowing wind. But a turbulent mind is more difficult than even taming the wind, as Arjuna explained to Krishna. So the mind would be the mind should be equipoised between good and bad, which is not going to happen. And Lord Chaitanya says the easiest methods are to chant the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. And the relatable examples that we discussed were even chanting not a single word is pure chanting, because the thoughts are always coming and going, and we are always distracted in this age of Kali. And another example was about Lord Rama's pastime. So many times he goes to penance and is distracted by the damsels.
Valmiki.
Sorry, in the Valmiki example, where he gets very easily distracted by the damsels from the heaven, which happened as part of the Lord Rama's pastime. So these are some scriptural examples. Apart from our day-to-day chanting, where we get very easily distracted, these are some scriptural examples as well. And the devotional service is the only method to control the mind, which gives us this spiritual satisfaction. But due to ignorance or the past impression, we are very easily misled. But at once, when we receive the taste of spiritual satisfaction, we get the opportunity to progress further. So one loses desire for anything else, other distractions, when we are able to get to the pure chanting level. So observing strict rules and regulations are very difficult, but following the path of devotional service is much simpler. And Prabhupada gives the example of Mati Hatha, which means the elephant goes into the water, takes a bath, and then comes out, and then it pours the mud on itself again. So the purpose of taking bath is defeated, right? Like that, there's no point in doing the yoga if the mind is not engaged in the Krishna conscious activities, because yoga itself is connecting to Krishna. And all the activities that we do in the name of yoga in the modern days should be facilitating our connection to the source, which is Krishna, which is what is missing in the modern times. So unless one is engaged in Krishna consciousness, they cannot steadily control the mind. So that's the secret on how we can control the mind and get it to a steady state. So why should the mind be controlled? If the mind is not controlled, it will be engaged in anxieties and in so many other distractions. So the only way we can control the mind is by devotional service. So Mataji, and would you like to add anything additional from group 3?
I think you covered everything that we discussed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Excellent summary. Let's move to the next section. Which group has the next section?
I'm sorry, Prabhuji, I was muted. This is group 4, for section 4, chapter 6, verses 37-47, explaining destination of successful and unsuccessful yogis. So Prabhupada explained that activities in Krishna consciousness is the only auspicious activity, and everyone who voluntarily accepts all bodily discomforts for sake of making progress in Krishna consciousness is the perfect transcendentalist. So knowing that unsuccessful yogis who are unable to control mind, and the ones who fall after a little progress or the early stages of bhakti, are born in aristocrat families with the goal to try to elevate themselves in Krishna consciousness. And one who falls in a mature stage of bhakti which is the last 4 stages of Ashtanga Yoga, or after a long practice are unable to control their mind, born in devotees or acharya families, like, for example, our Om Vishnupada Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj. They don't have to go and search for Krishna consciousness. They are trained in devotional service from the very beginning of their lives. Another example is King Bharat, that finally in his 3rd life was born in Brahma family from the revival of previous transcendental consciousness. But the important part is, even though you might be unsuccessful transcendentalist, he may be subjected to the reactions of not perfectly executing the prescribed duties, but his pious acts in Krishna consciousness will never be forgotten or gone in vain. One will continue to advance in bhakti even if he's born to a low-class family. For example, Haridas Thakur was born in Muslim family and was given post of Namacharya by Lord Chaitanya because of his rigid schedule of chanting 300,000 holy names japa daily. As far as successful yogis, they reach to Paramatma stage where they can achieve liberation, and even higher level of success is perfection, where complete meditation is on Krishna, attaining only by Bhakti Yoga, which is the ultimate goal of all yogis. As it was mentioned in verse 47, Yoginam api sarvesham madgatin antaratmanam shraddhavan bhajate yo mam same yukta tamo mata, which means of all yogis, one who is always abides in me with great faith, worshipping me in transcendental loving service, is most intimately united with me in yoga, and it is the highest of all. Hare Krishna. Thank you all the participants for helping with this presentation. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you. Very good. Excellent job, all of you. Just a little bit of feedback. One is just be aware of the time that the group's going to take. Second is please turn your camera on. I have asked that for all the participants, but especially for those who are presenting. It's important for us to build that sense of participating together in the study. And as I always mention, that we are never meant to be an impersonal movement. So would like to see all of you in person as far as possible. I do understand that there are times when circumstances do not permit. So so you are the judge for that. But from my end, that's my request. So overall, if you look at chapter 6, it kind of does not sit completely in the category of karma, yet it is there in karma. Can somebody help me understand why has it been put in that section that belongs to karma?
It's more from, sorry.
If you can raise your hand. Yes, Chaitanya Prabhu.
Is it with the perspective of karma yoga that is being talked about, like you engage your occupational duties in Krishna conscious way?
Okay, thank you. Bhakti Vinod Prabhu.
Yeah, Hare Krishna Prabhu. So if you look at the different stages of Ashtanga Yoga, if you look at Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, you're still doing karma. You're still doing activities. You're trying to do's and the don'ts and the bodily exercises and the pranayama. That's why I think it's part of karma yoga. So because the 4 limbs are still part of activities.
Very good. Excellent answer. Yes. So, so the yoga ruruksha stage is essentially based almost entirely on karma. Right? It talks about yam and niyam. That's the do's and the don'ts, which means you do your recommendation is to do something and not do something. So essentially what it means is that we're performing karma. So what I wanted to do was quickly stitch together the presentations and give you an overview of the chapter, and then after that we'll pause for any discussion. So there are three new tattvas that are introduced in this chapter by Krishna. One is the obvious, that he introduces Arjuna to Astanga Yoga or Dhyan Yoga. Then, for the first time, he is introducing a spiritual goal for Arjuna. If you look at the instructions by Krishna in the previous 5 chapters, except for a few cases where he kind of mentions it passingly, he has not introduced any spiritual goal to Arjuna. His instructions has mostly been that how to develop a mood of working with detachment. He has referenced spirituality in general works. Like in the 4th chapter, he says that work in transcendence, and the offering is in transcendence, and the goal is transcendence, right? So he introduces it as a general non-material concept, but here he introduces Arjuna to Paramatma, right? So this is the beginning of Arjuna's journey to bhakti. And then for the first time again, Krishna is now saying that it is okay to give up work. So far, he has steadfastly been discouraging Arjuna from giving up work. Arjuna keeps saying, should I work? Should I not work? Krishna says, they're the same but work. They're the same but work. Here he says they're the same, but if you're qualified, you can give up work. Right? So he's taking Arjuna and us to further levels of advancements. So in the 5th chapter, we saw that Krishna had spoken about the 3 doers. The Jiva desires, the Paramatma sanctions, and Prakriti executes. He also spoke about the same 3 being non-doers. Right? He said that the Jiva does not really do anything, right? Na kratvatam na karmani lokasya srajate prabhu. Right? So he says the person sitting in the body doesn't do anything, nor does it induce any action, anything. And the reason he says that is to promote detachment in the Jiva. Right? So if the Jiva understands that I'm not the doer, then he will not be attached to the fruits of the result. Then he also says that the Paramatma is not the doer. Right? He says, Nadate kaschit papam nacheva sukritam vidu agyani avrutam tena muyanti jantava. That it's only those who are muyanti, who are illusioned, who say that the Lord is the doer. And he introduces the notion of the Lord being the non-doer so that the Jiva takes accountability. He does not say this is all happening because of Krishna. I'm stealing because Paramatma in me is inspiring me to steal. I'm not doing pious activities because the Paramatma in me is inspiring me to do so. Right? So Krishna is saying, no, Paramatma is not doing anything. You are accountable. And he focuses Arjuna's attention on the Prakriti for him to develop humility. So, a person who's flying a supersonic jet, and then he goes around boasting that, do you know that I can travel faster than the speed of sound? And the other person says, it's not really you, it's the plane that's moving. You're just sitting there, right? So that automatically will get the person some sense, a reality check. That tomorrow, if I'm removed from that supersonic jet and I'm put on a cycle, then that's the only speed that I can do. So having developed this notion of the three doers and non-doers, now Krishna has also introduced Paramatma. And he is going to develop the notion of the relationship with Paramatma, right? So while Krishna begins the chapter, once again talking about work with detachment, he quickly gets Arjun's attention to Paramatma as the object of meditation. Now, this is a very important stage in one's spiritual advancement, which most of us as devotees do not really experience because of the mercy of Prabhupada and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Typically, when one is making a spiritual, making progress in spiritual journey, they first experience material detachment, then they experience spiritual attachment. So all that Krishna has spoken so far is to instill material detachment in Arjun. Now he is speaking about spiritual attachment. So in the fourth canto of the Bhagavatam, when Prithu Maharaj is receiving instruction from Sanat Kumar, then he says that, can you summarize to me the process of making, how can I go back to Godhead? Can you summarize the process? And Sanat Kumar right away says, simply by doing two things, by developing material detachment and at the same time, increasing your spiritual attachment, you are guaranteed to go. So the reason I said that we did not experience it is because we were directly introduced to spiritual attachment. We were directly introduced to prasadam, chanting of the holy name, bhajan, kirtan, and material attachment came off as a byproduct. That's the potency of bhakti that we will see. But the krama, the step-by-step process that Krishna is taking Arjun through is that first detach yourself materially and then attach yourself spiritually. So Krishna gives the eligibility for giving up work. The senses are under control by the practice of karma. The desires are under control by the practice of jnana. And the mind is now in the process of being under control. Right? And only at this stage does one become eligible to give up work. And we have discussed a lot about it. So why each one of them is important, we know. Why one needs to act, why jnana is important. But the reason that Krishna is now saying is that all the impediments, the potential traps in prematurely renouncing work are addressed by one who has properly practiced these attendant yogas. If their senses are under control, they are not going to seek out the object. If the desires are under control, the person is not going to be a false renunciate. Right? And if the mind is under control, it's not going to drive the person for seeking either fulfillment of the senses or the desire. So so the group that was speaking about Stang Yoga, they did a great job. So I'm not going to go over the angas, just at the first four, and I'll share the slide with you so you can read it. The first four stages are Yoga Ruruksha, the preliminary stages, and the final four stages are Yoga Rudha. The stage of Pratyahara is considered to be the pivotal stage. Before that, the focus is mostly on preparing to control the mind. Pratyahara means, so ahar means food. Pratyahara means that you are now taking food from within. So one is now taking satisfaction from oneself. One does not need any engagement from any external object. And then dharana, dhyans, and samadhi, they're essentially the same, which is concentration of the mind, but with greater and greater focus. So dharana means that you now establish an object for your mind. Dhyan is that you start meditating upon it, and samadhi is complete absorption. So these are the 8 stages: yam, niyam, asana, pranayam, pratyahara, dharana, dhyan, and samadhi. And I have a interesting mnemonic for you to remember this, which is YNAP, leads to devotional service. So it's YNAP and PDDS. Just a way to remember it. Okay. So why does Krishna speak about Astanga Yoga? Right. So if you have read Prabhupada's purport, Prabhupada is not very happy about Krishna speaking about Astanga Yoga. Right. In the purport, he keeps saying, don't worry about it. It's difficult. I can guarantee that you will fail. Like Prabhupada, he over and over again makes these points. Krishna speaks about it for the sake of completeness. It's one of the authorized paths, right? So if he does not speak about it, one might say, well, Bhagavad Gita does not speak about Astanga Yoga, right? So he speaks for the sake of completeness. He speaks to show the difficulty of the path, right? So if you look at the verses that come in the later part of the practice, then Krishna, he will use words like gradually, slowly, by and by, right? He says that one should sit with great determination, patience. So all these are recommendations by Krishna that you are in for a long and difficult journey. So have patience, because you will fail again and again. Have determination, because you will be doing this for a very long time. Right? So he does that, and Arjun speaks. He says that controlling the mind is like controlling the wind. And Krishna says, yes, you're right. But he says, Abhyasaina to Kaunteya Vairagya, right? He gives a solution, but he agrees that yes, it is right. So he does it to show the difficulty of the path. Then the initial stages of the yoga, they're still based on activities. So he's illustrating the potency of doing your prescribed duties. That even if you're doing Astanga Yoga, until you reach the very advanced stage, you still have to take shelter of activities. He shows the position of failed yogis and shows the position of the perfect yogi, which becomes his segue into bhakti. So we saw that Krishna speaks about the 2 stages of yoga, the yoga rurukshu and the yoga rudha. After the yoga rurukshu, safe to give up work, right? Because Krishna has initially offered work as a way to keep your senses, your desires, and your mind controlled. Now the practitioner has able to control them. He's firmly in control of the senses, the desires, and the mind. So the work is optional. You do it or you don't. So in the Astanga Yoga, most important is control of mind. And Krishna makes the statement that an uncontrolled mind is an enemy and a controlled mind is a friend. Now, this is not just for a yogi. This is even for a devotee, for everyone, but especially for a yogi. Because the whole process of the yogi is to control the mind. Now, controlling the mind is a means to an end. For a yogi who simply controls the mind and stays at that point, he will get partial results. What does he get? Siddhis. But the real purpose of controlling the mind is that then you take it and direct it to Krishna. That is the highest yogi. So he gives some steps to control the mind. So, and this is again a revision. So he says that one who is equal to happiness and distress, heat and cold. So this you're familiar with. This one gets through the proper practice of detached activities, karma yoga. He who is fully satisfied with the virtue of acquired knowledge and realization, this is Gyan, and realization is Vigyan. This is the path of knowledge. He who sees everything, whether it is pebbles, stones, or gold. So this is the initial stage of yoga, where one is not perturbed by material disparity. And then further advanced is one who sees the friends and enemies as the same. This is the more advanced path. So, so it is said that it is very difficult to be the well-wisher of your enemy. It is easy to be neutral to the enemy, but very difficult to be the well-wisher of one who does not wish you well. Only way you can do it is if you see not just that the enemy is a soul, but also that the same super soul that is worshipable in your body is also residing within the person who is inimical to you. Right? It's like let's assume your mother comes to visit you, right? And you're happy, your mother is living in your house, you're serving her, everything is going well. There's a relative of yours, and you don't get along with the person, right? But he's related to your mother also, so your mother now goes and lives in his house for some time. Now your notion towards that person is going to change. Why? Because your mother is living there. He's serving your mother. Your mother is having a good amicable exchanges with him. So that's the notion of a Yoga Rudha. He not only sees everybody as a soul, but he also sees the Paramatma residing in everyone. And then he becomes not only Sama Drishti, but he becomes Sama Buddhi. He becomes equal to friend and enemy. Krishna speaks about preparing for yoga, and Prabhupada in the purport explains, he said you should sit, because if you stand, you'll get tired. If you lie down, you'll sleep. You have an asana of Kushagrash, which is auspicious, available everywhere. Asana should be for the self only. You should not share with others. Asana should be of deer skin, because it keeps snakes and scorpions away. Neither too high, because one is sitting too high, they get proud. Sitting too low, false humility. There's a flooding, it gets flooded. Sit in a sacred place, it calms the mind, and sit firmly, because patience and determinations are very important. The process is long and there are many failures. So further practice, Krishna says, sit straight to align the chakras. Achalam, unshaken faith. Also don't shake the body. Celibacy, moderation in eating, sleeping, recreation, and work. And then Krishna starts introducing himself. That fearlessness means you depend on me. And Krishna says, meditate on me. So in this whole thing, the impediment is the mind, and the vehicle for perfection is the mind. And the way to control the mind, once again, Krishna says that abhyasena, practice what? Spiritual attachment. Vairagya. Detachment from what? Material conception. So that which you have been practicing in the initial stages of Astanga Yoga in karma and jnana is now coming together. That you have been able to develop material detachment, you're practicing spiritual attachment, these two things together will control the mind. And then Arjuna says, what if I fail? Right? He gives the analogy of a ribbon cloud, that the person is not even well situated materially and spiritually has failed. And Krishna says, don't worry, that failure is okay. If you fail in the initial stages, that means you have failed because you did not develop sufficient material detachment. You had a desire to enjoy materially, so you will get a birth in a materially opulent family. There you can expunge your desire and then continue. If you fall in an advanced stage, in the Yoga Ruddha stage, it means that you were not able to develop sufficient spiritual attachment. So you get an opportunity to take birth in a devotee family, where the environment is conducive to spiritual attachment. That's what Prabhupada would say, that one who takes birth in a devotee family, he has done karma, jnana, astanga, he has done all of it. And then he is getting this opportunity to take birth. So in conclusion, Krishna said that yogi is better than ascetic. So ascetic is one who performs austerities without knowledge of the soul, just performs austerities. He's better than an empiricist, he's a jnani, and better than a karmi for obvious reasons. That because the yogi has now a spiritual goal. Right? So because the yogi is developing a relationship to the Paramatma. Now, important to note that Krishna in this list, does not include devotees. Right? He says ascetic, he says empiricist, he says fruity workers, does not say devotee, because a devotee stands superior to a yogi. And the unspoken question would be that who is the best of the yogis? So Krishna, he speaks on behalf of Arjuna at this point, and he says that one who with great faith in me, abides in me, thinks of me within himself, and renders transcendental loving service to me, which is now Krishna's segue into bhakti. So this is our summary of the chapter. That was again very nicely presented by the groups. I stitched it together. At this point, I can pause and see if there are any discussions. Rajiv Shamprabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you so much. This was very nice. Actually, I always get confused, or not confused, but this chapter seems to be very technical, actually. And all these terms kind of seem a little bit over my head, actually. So as a aspiring bhakti yogi, how critical is it for us to know all of these terms? I guess it's probably better to know them just from a preaching standpoint, but as like practicing themselves, how important is it for us to focus on this?
So Srila Prabhupada's take on this is that this is not a path that we are following. Krishna is introducing us to this path for the reasons I explained, because it's one of the bona fide path, and also to show that it's a difficult path, right? So we can read this chapter to build conviction in ourselves that we are doing the right thing. Like tomorrow, let's assume a person who's following Astanga Yoga comes to you and says, Prabhu, when I do my morning meditation, I feel so calm and peaceful, and you see it on his face is effulgent, and you see that he's detached. How can you make sure that will not shake your faith? By at least getting this understanding. And we don't have to go technical. The 8 angas of Ashtanga Yoga are actually not given by Krishna. They are just given by me. And I think whoever did the presentation as a service to the devotees, because when people say Ashtanga Yoga, they want to know what are the eight angas, right? So that's why it is given. So general understanding is good. But since you're studying Bhakti Shastri, you would need to have a little bit more technical understanding, just from the perspective of being able to address the questions.
Thank you.
Chaitanya Prabhu?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, my understanding of, the two, it is very, kind of very, it gets to the heart, where we are saying material detachment and spiritual attachment. Those two things are very strong sort of phrases. But is it like, it's like a toggle? Either you will have material attachment or a spiritual attachment. Material detachment. If wherever there is material detachment, there will be a spiritual attachment. Is it like that, or how does it?
So there are 2 ways I can answer your question, Prabhu. One is that it's not a toggle for practicing devotees. So Prabhupada would give this example, which is beautiful because it explains things clearly. He says you have a glass that is full of ink, and you have another glass that is full of milk. So you want to have the glass that is full of ink to be full of milk. There are 2 ways that you can do it. You can take the glass, toss the contents out, make sure it's empty, and then put the milk over there. This is the sequential process. Material detachment, spiritual attachment. Other process is, let the ink stay in the glass, but put milk on it. So what do you have first? Ink and milk. Put more milk on it. Then you have milk and ink. Put more milk in it. And then you have milk. Right? So that's the process of bhakti. That we continue to engage ourselves more and more into devotion, so that as a byproduct of it, the attraction that we have for the material senses goes away. Now, both the things are happening. Right? If a devotee is not developing material detachment, he is not making progress. Prabhupada's disciples would come and ask him, Prabhupada, how do I know I'm making progress? Prabhupada sometimes would say that, how anxious are you to chant? Right? Or sometimes he would say that, how disturbed do you get by the material things? So he's asking these 2 questions. How spiritually attached are you? How materially detached? Right? So both things should happen, but it does not have to happen like you throw the ink out and then put the milk. Right? So that's the process that we follow. Is that okay?
Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay, thank you. Gayatri Mataji.
Hare Krishna. Can you please explain what are those 2 stages, Brahma Bhuta and Brahma Nirvana?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mataji. Bhakti Vinod Prabhu?
Krishna Prabhu, again, it's a question, it's not more of a question, just a clarification. So after this chapter, we can give the Unit 1 exam. Yes.
Yes. So I was going to speak of this after the Q&A, but since you brought it up, whoever is ready to give the exam should send me an email and I will send them the question paper.
Yeah, and the follow-up on that was like, so the questions would be, as you had discussed in the first class, would be the closed book questions and the verses to memorize for the first section.
Yes. Yes. So all the questions will be from the questions that are there in the VT material that was sent to you, and so will the verses be from there.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu.
Okay. Kokila Mataji?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, then with Pranam Krishna Prabhupada. Prabhuji, my question is, the Ashtanga yogis, when they start to meditate, they are trying to find the Paramatma, or in the process, they realize there is Paramatma?
So it has to be a deliberate process. It's not that one accidentally stumbles on Paramatma, because if you look at the concluding verses, Krishna actually says that the yogi can meditate on whatever he likes. And in the 3 verses, he says that the yogi can meditate on the Brahman, he can meditate on Paramatma, or he can meditate on the personality of Godhead. But the stage in the 8 stages, if you remember, the 5th stage is the 6th stage is dharana. Pratyahara is you turn your focus inside. Dharana is, now what am I going to focus on? Like dharana is taking on something. So at that point, the yogi, he fixes some object of meditation, whether it is Brahman, Paramatma, or Krishna, and then he proceeds to meditate on that deliberately.
Got it, Prabhuji. So Brahman, I understand they are it's light or something. Personality, we understand that they have the Krishna in a person and they try to meditate on him. But Paramatma, how they meditate, Prabhuji? They think of 400 form of Vishnu, or they think of light, or
they do. They think so. So in the Patanjali Sutras, which describe the Astanga Yoga in great details, there is a very detailed description given of Paramatma that is residing in the lotus of one's heart. That he is 9 inches tall, he has 4 hands, he has curly hair, he has a chakra and a gada. So there's a very, very detailed description. And there is a very detailed description on how the yogi should meditate on the Paramatma, beginning from the lotus toes of the Paramatma. And the earlier meditation, which happens at the stage of dhyan, is on the form of the Paramatma. And when one reaches the stage of samadhi, then one meditates on a particular aspect of the Paramatma and completely focuses on that aspect. So it is explained with some amount of details by Lord Kapila in the 3rd canto of the Bhagavatam, but in much greater details in the Patanjali Sutras.
very cool, Prabhuji. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ajit Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Pranam Prabhupada. So probably a quick question, basically from verse 642 on extension of verse 642, where Prabhupada says, that if a transcendentalist is unsuccessful after long practice of yoga, then they take birth in a family which is a family of transcendentalists and so forth. But what about devotees? If a devotee is unsuccessful, then what happens? And my question particularly in that regard is, if a devotee is following the 4 negative principles, we are following all of the instructions, chanting around and so forth, is there such a thing as being unsuccessful as even after following all of those instructions? And secondly, well, the reason I'm asking this is that there seems to be a fine line between faith and the confidence that comes from having faith in these recommendations, that if we follow these, we'll be able to go back to Godhead, versus on the other side, you don't want to take anything for granted. You don't want to be arrogant that, we are following this process, so we will go back to Godhead. It's a fine line between being confident in the instructions of the acharyas versus taking too much for granted. So want to watch for any pitfalls or anything that might lead to the devotee being unsuccessful.
Thank you, Prabhu. Wonderful question. So Prabhupada shows us that if we follow the 4 regulated principle, we chant the 16 rounds, we abide by the instruction of the spiritual master, he will personally take us back to Godhead. There's no question of us being unsuccessful. Once Prabhupada was giving a lecture, and he said that if you have to go back to Godhead, you have to be 100% Krishna conscious. And there was pin drop silence. Everybody was looking at everybody else, that it's difficult to be 100% Krishna conscious. So Prabhupada looked back and then he said, 90% Krishna conscious, right? And there were still people who were silent. And he said 80% Krishna conscious, right? And then finally he said 72% Krishna conscious, but no less than that, right? So I'm not sure if the percentages have any meaning, but the point that Prabhupada was making, that if you have some deficiencies, I will make it up for it, right? But from your side, don't count on it. You try your best, and like, Krishna says that I will preserve what you have and I will carry what you lack. So Prabhupada is doing the same for us, more merciful than Krishna. So all we have to do is to, as you were saying, follow what we have been asked to do. That's our adhikar, right? That's a right. We follow what we have to do. We can be assured of success. I think maybe I misread, but one of the questions you asked was, what happens to unsuccessful devotees? Yes, there are unsuccessful devotees, right? Almost all of us are unsuccessful devotees. Why? Because we took to Krishna consciousness because we had purva rasa, right? We had prior attachment to devotional service, but we were not able to perfect it. So Krishna gave us another opportunity. Either he gave us birth in devotee families or he gave us association of devotees, right? Each one of us can trace our beginning of Krishna consciousness to some mercy that we got without even asking for it. Like somebody came and forcibly gave a book into our hand or put prasadam in our mouth, or somebody came and persistently said, chant Prabhu, right? And we were saying, can't, and he was saying, chant. Why? That was Krishna's arrangement, because we had showed our interest in Krishna, previous lifetime, previous 10,000 lifetimes, whatever it was. But we should not play the same Russian roulette again, right? Now we should make this our last birth and say, okay, Krishna, I have played with your mercy enough. Now time for me to take full advantage of it. But if we don't, then same thing will happen again. We'll take birth where we'll eventually get opportunity to get the association of devotees, and we continue our progress from wherever we start. Bhaktisiddhanta would say that this material world is a dangerous place. Don't flirt with Maya, right? So, okay. So, Ranga Mataji.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. So I had a question. As aspiring devotees, we try our level best to have our day-to-day lives aligned with Krishna consciousness, and try to dovetail all that we do. But sometimes as devotees, we feel, okay, I need a break, I need vacation, right? So how do we process that kind of requests? Because we're all practicing devotees. The very moment that we get the feeling of, okay, I need a break or a vacation, doesn't that mean that we are not aligning our activities in service to Krishna? If so, how do we get that come over it? And is there, we do see some devotees do take vacation, and some devotees don't. They continue with their regular services. So how do we process those kind of situations? Because this came from the point that you said about material detachment and spiritual attachment. So
Yes,
Or-
I can see that. Excellent question. A couple of thoughts here. So one is that we are in this for the long run. So we should see ourselves as marathon runners, not as sprinters, right? So we are basically running a marathon, which means, so what is the main thing that marathon runners do? What are the ones who win marathons? What is their main ability? Is that they're able to pace themselves. They know they have to run the 26.5 kilometers, whatever it is. So they pace themselves. You'll see the winners are the ones who are kind of running somewhere in the middle of the flock for most of the race. And then towards the end, they kind of peel off. So we basically are not going to perfect a devotional service in one day or 1 week or 1 year. We are in it for the rest of our lives, right? So that's our understanding. Having developed that understanding, the next important thing is understanding our adhikar. So there was a whole seminar on this in Gita Nagari, that how do you understand your eligibility? Adhikar is what is your eligibility to execute devotional service. For some, it is 24/7 engagement in spiritual activities. For some, it may be 24/5, or some maybe it be 8/5, some it may be maybe like when people come new to spirituality, what do you say to them? Prabhu, can you chant just 1 round every day? It takes you 5 minutes to chant, right? And you said that's all you have to do, only chant 1 round a day. Why? That's the eligibility of the person, 5 minutes a day, right? Somebody who's been coming for a while, Prabhu, I'm sure you can carve out 2 hours a day and chant 16 minutes. That's that eligibility of the person. So working very closely with one's spiritual master who knows what your adhikar is, that can help you pace yourself in devotional service. Third aspect over here is that by nature, bhakti that has been given to us is multifaceted. If you get tired of Bhakti Shastri, listen to Kirtan. If you're tired of Kirtan, call your friend and spend some time. If you're tired of going out with friends, go for a japa walk. So many things, right? If you're tired of everything, go to Govinda's and eat over there. So many things are there that are available for us to engage ourselves. If you're tired of all that, still, because at the stage that where we all are, still okay to take as you were putting it euphemistically, still okay to take a break. But the break should not violate any principle, right? It should not violate the regulative principles. It should not mean that your idea of break is to go and sit in a Mayavadi conference and listen to what they are saying. That's not the idea of a break. Break should not violate the basic principles, right? But the momentum should be maintained. It's a big topic, and I'm sure I did not do justice to your question. But in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. Shakthi Mantra.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
You're on mute, Prabhu.
Sorry, Prabhu. Yeah, so in the slides that you showed for the non-doer, there is humility and there is detachment. So I understood the concept of humility, where we understand it's because of the modes of material nature that have acquired something. There's nothing great about me, so that humbles us. But I didn't understand the concept of detachment. So can you please give some understanding?
So when Krishna says that all this is not being done by you, right? When he says na kathiravam na karmani lokasya srayati prabhu, that you are just sitting in this husk and nothing is actually being done by you. So when Krishna says it's a fact, right? So if we accept that as a fact, then the next conclusion is that all that I think that I should be enjoying is not meant for my enjoyment. right? So I go and I prepare, and I use the prasadam example because it's slightly funny also, that I go and I prepare all this kheer, and then I realize that it is really not me that is doing it. There's nothing for me to be proud about. That I'm the cause of the creation of this kheer. It is essentially the forces of material nature that came together. The nature of the rice and the milk and the sugar, the heat that came in. These are all the forces that came in and made it what it was, right? So what am I to be proud of? So he says that to Burijan Prabhu gives this example, not the kheer example, but the humility example, that Burijan Prabhu makes this point that as long as the jiva thinks that he is the cause of the result of the activities, he will continue to be attached to them. He will continue to be proud. I did this, because of me did this happens. Krishna is saying you are not doing it. Right? So that connection to pride is broken right away. Okay.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay, so we'll just in the interest of time, I think we'll just take the three more questions and stop after that. Rangamataji.
Sorry, Prabhuji, I didn't lower my hand. I'm sorry.
No. Okay. Chitra Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. You talked about 8 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga. Can you please briefly explain what is Samadhi?
So the last 3 ankas, the dharana, dhyan, and samadhi, they are essentially the bringing your mind to the object of the meditation with increased focus. Right? So Krishna gives 3 cases of the mind not engaging with the object. Right? He says that the mind could be wandering, or it could be unsteady, or it could be flickering. Like he says, Nischalam, Asthiram, and Achalam. So in the earlier stage, the mind wanders. So I'm thinking, sitting and thinking, and we can relate to chanting because we all have experience to it. So I'm chanting and I'm saying that I should focus on the holy name, right? Next thing I know is I'm thinking about my work, and I never come back to the chanting, right? My 16 rounds are over, and I was thinking about how my day is gonna go. That is the earlier stage. That is the wandering mind, right? Then the second stage is the mind wanders but comes back. Right? It goes, it wanders, but then it comes back. Right? That's the second stage. And the third stage is that the mind stays on the object, but it flickers. Like when the bulb is on, sometimes it is bright and sometimes it is dim. So sometimes the focus is strong and sometimes the focus is weak, but it is always there. So the successive stages take the mind through these stages of unsteadiness. And finally, when it reaches the stage of samadhi, then there is no flickering also. Then the mind is firmly anchored to the object of the meditation, to Paramatma, right? That is why this whole process is so strongly anchored on the position of the mind, because the mind is used to establish a connection with the Lord. Okay? And the specifics of what happens, like when the mind is focusing, as I mentioned, that is given in great details in the Yoga Sutras. That how one can meditate even on the effulgence of the toenail of Krishna. Right. So then yogis spend long time, years and years, meditating on that. And then they meditate on the ankle bell of Krishna, the knees of Krishna. So it's a stage that is a little difficult for us to relate to. But nevertheless, it's a bona fide process. We know it works because in the Bhagavatam we see. So what example comes to your mind of one who successfully performed Astanga Yoga to reach Krishna? Chaitanya Prabhu?
No. I had a question, Prabhu.
Chitra Mataji, you remember one example in the Bhagavatam of one who uses Astanga Yoga to perfect Rajiv Sham Prabhu?
Is it Dhruva Maharaj?
Dhruva Maharaj, very good, right? So we see the example of Dhruva, that in 6 months he was meditating, focusing on Krishna, and he gave up everything. And what happens to him? Krishna comes, Lord Vishnu comes and stands in front of him. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Indu Mataji?
Hare Krishna Prabhu. So it is mentioned that the mind can be your best friend or your worst enemy. So my question is, what is the difference between the mind and intelligence? Or like, how is intelligence related to the mind? Is it controlling the mind?
It's a good question, Mataji. For the purpose of these discussions, they are considered to be the same. Right. Technically, there is a difference between the mind and the intelligence. But that is more from the perspective of, what is the body composed of? The gross body is composed of the 5 gross elements. The subtle body is composed of mind, intelligence, and false ego. How does the intelligence relate with the mind? So there's a technical difference between the two. But for all these discussions, like when Raghunath Das Goswami talks about Mana Shiksha, instructions to the mind, they're basically same category, mind and intelligence. They're basically the ability to introspect, the ability to discriminate. So the composite of mind and intelligence is being addressed. Okay, so last question.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Pati. Last question.
Prabhu.
Yeah.
I just had a question on, we know that some of the new devotees have joined. I was wondering if they are already added to the WhatsApp group, because I'm sending all the conversations and all the important stuff in the WhatsApp group.
I have added them, Prabhu.
Okay. And devotees, just a reminder again, I have sent a survey. If you can please take the survey, it will be helpful to divide the groups. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So for next week, if everybody can read the 7th chapter, and then we will basically divide and discuss while we are in session next week. And that essentially is the beginning of the second module of the Bhagavad Gita. Okay, so we'll end now. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Anant Koti Vaishnavrind ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Jai Gaur Premanandi.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.